Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into something that is, honestly, pretty chilling. We're going to open up the records on a clinical case study involving a company called Cellutech Inc. and a highly experimental drug known simply as Lengo 44. Now, this isn't just your standard story about medical advancement. Far from it. It's actually a profound and frankly unsettling look at the terrifying unintended consequences of pushing the absolute boundaries of human biology.
So let me ask you, would you risk your mind for 200 bucks? I know it sounds crazy, right? But meet Carl Backstrom. Carl wasn't some daring scientist or medical pioneer. He was just a 28-year-old out-of-work machinist who was desperately trying to make rent. To him, answering an ad for a quick $200 payout for a clinical trial, it seemed like a total no-brainer. He was just a regular guy looking for some quick cash, completely, utterly unaware of the absolute nightmare he was walking right into. All right, Section 1, the Lengo 44 experiment. So picture this. It all kicks off on a totally unremarkable gray Tuesday morning over at Cellutech Inc.
Carl walks into this incredibly nondescript building. You know the type, smells like cheap antiseptic. And he's met by this hyper-confident, restless guy named Dr. George Tanner. And the steps that led to Carl's entrapment, they are terrifyingly mundane. Think about it. He answers the ad. He casually signs the intake forms without even glancing at the fine print, which, honestly, is a mistake that's going to cost him literally everything. And then he takes the Lengo 44 injection. It goes into his arm with absolutely no more sensation than a totally routine flu shot.
Moving right along to Section 2, unlocking cellular memory. Now, to really grasp what happens next, we've got to talk about the groundbreaking science behind that ordinary feeling shot. So Dr. Tanner's team was absolutely obsessed with this wild concept called cellular memory. Basically, they hypothesized that their new drug compound could do the impossible. They thought it could stimulate and unlock dormant memories or behavioral traits that were inherited directly from a person's ancestors. They firmly believed that Lengo #44 was like a biological master key. The idea was that it would physically bypass the brain entirely and just unlock raw data that had been buried deep within the subject's DNA for centuries. Okay, so after the injection, the protocol demands a strict 3-hour waiting period. Just imagine this agonizing wait. Carl is left completely isolated in this sterile, white observation room. There's nothing in there but a chair, a cot, and a ticking clock on the wall. And he just sat there. The clock ticked, the experimental drug coursed through his veins. Carl just waited in total silence. Until finally, Dr. Tanner opened the door. Which brings us to Section 3, an astonishing medical breakthrough. Because when that observation room door finally opened, medical history was altered forever. Tanner basically bounces in, cheerfully asking, "How are you doing, Carl?" Carl looks up and tries to respond, but the words that tumble out of his mouth, they are slow, they are bizarrely heavy with consonants, and they are definitely not English. Tanner immediately flags down Dr. Harold Simmons, who is the staff language specialist. Simmons listens carefully for a second, and you can just picture all the blood draining from his face. He identifies it as archaic Swedish. We're talking about a form of the tongue that hasn't been spoken aloud in roughly 2,000 years. See, Carl's ancestors emigrated from Sweden generations ago, carrying that ancient tongue directly in their very cells. And Lengo 44, it had actually successfully unlocked it. Now, you'd think Dr. Tanner's immediate reaction would be, concern for his patient. Nope. It was absolute elation. The guy is pacing the corridor outside, practically vibrating with excitement. In his head, he's already drafting his journal articles, he's prepping the press releases, and he's ready to boast about the extraordinary promise of this breakthrough. To Tanner, the experiment worked beyond his wildest dreams. It was a massive, historic victory.
But here we are at Section 4, the tragic unintended consequence. Because while Tanner is out in the hallway congratulating himself, a total nightmare is rapidly unfolding back inside the observation room.
The contrast in that facility was just staggering. On one side of the glass, you've got Dr. Tanner, totally consumed by blind scientific ambition and celebration. But on the other side, Carl Backstrom's reality has completely fractured. Tanner hurries back in only to find Carl on his feet, his face flushed, just shouting in absolute terror in this ancient tongue, hands balled into fists. It literally took 2 orderlies wrestling the struggling man down the hall just to strap him into restraints for his own safety. Dr. Tanner pulls his language specialist aside, completely bewildered by this. I mean, from a purely scientific perspective, the drug worked perfectly, right? But Dr. Simmons quietly explains the true horror of what's happening. Turns out,
Carl actually understood exactly what had happened at first. He was just as amazed and excited as the doctors were. The true, irreversible nightmare only began when Carl tried to revert back to his native language to ask a simple question in English. Dr. Simmons turns to a waiting Tanner and just delivers this devastating diagnosis. He says he couldn't. He has forgotten how. He cannot understand a single word we say to him. He cannot read the sign above the door or the label on a water bottle. For Carl Backstrom, English no longer exists. Just let that sink in. There is only the old language now. For a measly $200, Carl is permanently, irreversibly trapped in the 2,000-year-old language of his ancestors.
So we leave Dr. Tanner standing there in the hallway in stunned silence. He's looking through the glass at Carl, who is just opening his mouth and closing it again, entirely unable to communicate his terror to the modern world. It's an incredibly powerful, sobering reminder of the devastating costs of meddling with human biology, and it really leaves us with one haunting question to wrap up on today. When science unlocks the past, what parts of our present are we willing to lose?